it was very important in the Forest Becomes Her. It's set in Concord, Massachusetts, which is a often written about place. So I needed to really occupy Concord. And this is a fictional situation, by the way. This is not based on a real forest, so it's clear cut, but I did want to capture Concord as it is. And the area of Walden Woods, and I feel like Concord is this oozing with history, not just like human history, but like natural history. We've got Walden Woods there. If you've ever walked around it, there's just something buzzing about it. So I did feel very strongly about rooting people in the natural world of those places. And I have a new book I just finished the first draft of last week that's set in a future Alaska. And so I want it to be very rooted in that place too, but it's a place that isn't really real yet. So I had to do a lot of imaginative research there.
That's very cool. And it's true, like it really comes through in this book, the Concord landscapes and the sort of feeling of Concord. And also there's a lot of Concord history in this book. Louisa May Alcott features in the book, and Thoreau, and it's sort of this storied history, absolutely appropriate for a book like this, which is really an environmental novel, to be set in Concord, which is it has such a pedigree of environmentalists and things like that. So, could you talk a little bit about the history in the book? I mean, how did you incorporate those historical elements? Did you set out to do that, or did that sort of just naturally flow into it?
It was all part of the design from the beginning. I had read an essay by Emerson called The Oversoul when I was first, and I wasn't reading it for this book. I had the concept for the book, and then I read the essay totally separately. It's something I think I'd read a long time ago, and I was just revisiting Emerson. And the story, or the essay, The Oversoul, really digs into this, idea of divinity in the natural world existing in each other and being like one thing. And it really got in my head. And I was thinking about, the way Emerson saw the natural world, and then thinking more broadly about the transcendentalist in general in Concord, which was, Emerson, Thoreau, the Alcott family, Nathaniel Hawthorne. I mean, Frederick Douglass passed through these circles, Margaret Fuller. We had all these amazing literary giants that were in this place in Concord. And so the history just sort of overlapped with the natural history of Concord, and it just felt like the right direction. And a little fun fact, the original title of this novel was The Oversoul.
Oh, that's cool. And the Oversoul does come into it, particularly.
Yes. Well, Hazel, one of the characters, is reading The Oversoul in one of the first chapters of the book, kind of like just to kind of plant a little thought in reader's mind, that this, just keep an eye on these ideas. But yes, my original title was The Oversoul. But my editor thought it was a little too close to The Overstory by Richard Powers, and that maybe it implied a different genre that I wasn't going for. So we changed it, but it's definitely has a lot of Oversoul vibes in it.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the sort of history, and it's kind of very cool that this book, becomes an extension of, sort of takes part in this American history of transcendentalism and, the Concord area and concern for nature and the environment, and sort of extends it into the contemporary times, which I think is wonderful. There's one other thing that also that's really important about this book, and that I personally really loved, and that was the focus on trees. I'm a huge tree fan, and I have been for a long time. But trees also have a long pedigree in literature. I mean, they have played a role in some of my favorite books, like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the Ents. And you mentioned Richard Powers' The Overstory, which is a book that, it seems to have been really influential in getting a lot of people to see trees in a more nuanced and more interesting light as these incredible beings that they are, which is something that your book does as well. So you could say that trees are kind of having a little bit of a moment right now. But maybe talk a little bit about your relationship to trees and how you decided to center them in this novel. Anything that you can say about trees in The Forest Becomes Her.
Yeah, so this the kernel of this story came from a grief I had, a wound, I guess you could call it, since we're a bunch of writers here, the wound. But when I was a young girl, I lived in a house surrounded by forest, and I played played in the woods. I was always climbing trees and building forts. And it was a place I went to for refuge. I had a tree, a specific tree. I called it the vine tree because it had a vine that hung down. I could sit on it, and I used to go back there and read all the time. In fact, I read Lord of the Rings back there. I read Little Women. I read all those Judy Blume books sitting in that tree, and it was my safe place, my happy place. And when I was around 13 years old, they cut it down. It wasn't our property; it was just property connected to our land, and they clear cut that area and built houses. And it was really traumatic for me. More so than you. I mean, it almost sounds silly, but like I grieved that tree like a human loss because it was such an important piece of my childhood, and it was my sanctuary. Yeah. And so I gave that grief to the character Polly, who's a 13-year-old girl in the book. I handed her my wound. If she lost the forest in her backyard, and I kind of let her act it out with a little bit more resources and agency and chutzpah than I had at her age, which was important to me. But throughout my whole life, I've had trees in my life. I had the house where I raised my 4 children. We had this beautiful Japanese maple tree in our yard that just kind of made a canopy that my kids all used to go underneath like a little fort and play, have built fairy houses and read. And I used to love watching them. And, in the yard where I live now at our house in New Hampshire, there are trees there that I have, these connections to. And I feel like Polly, the most of all the 3 characters in my book, has that part of me. There's a few scenes in the book where Polly goes into the forest before the trees are cut down, and she presses her cheek to the bark of the wood of the trees before they're cut down. And she holds her cheek there long enough to imprint the bark on her face because she feels like she's taking a part of them. Like she's like internalizing the trees before they are cut down when the construction crews come in. And although that's not something I did, if I had thought of it, I would have, when I was a kid. So the trees are very personal to me.
Yeah. That comes through for sure. And, it's sort of one of the beauties of fiction. One of the reasons I love fiction is that you can take these pieces of reality and sort of use them as brushstrokes and sort of extend them to logical conclusions that maybe go beyond or go into darker places than your actual life does. So I think you've done that beautifully here. But this brings me to one topic that I really want to bring up because it's a topic that I've been quite interested in lately. And it was actually wonderful to see it in this book. And that is the speculative element. The book does have a speculative element. I heard you refer to it as magical realism that sort of gains momentum as the story goes on. And I'm wondering, just in terms of, when you were writing the book, at what point did that come in? Why did you incorporate it? What did it add to the story? What were some of the challenges maybe that you faced in terms of writing it or revising it?
Yeah, that's I don't actually remember making a conscious decision to introduce those elements. I think they showed up, and I think they showed up as an extension of awe. I think like the next step beyond awe is magic. When you go out into a forest or you're like watching the night sky full of stars and you can see the Milky Way, there's this huge sense of awe that feels like, to me, it's like 1 inch away from magic. And that just that feeling that kind of like soaks through your skin. That feeling is what I was trying to go for. And some of that can be scary. And there's some elements in this book that are the speculative elements are like uncomfortable for the characters sometimes. It's not a horror novel, but there are things that are uncomfortable for the characters. And it's kind of an extension of their emotions. And there are times in the story that I kind of want the reader to be a little uncomfortable and not knowing if it's really happening. Like, is it psychological or are these things really happening? And in some cases, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You'll have to read the book to find out. But I felt like I was digging into my childhood love. And I don't even want to say my childhood. I still believe I'm an inch away from magic, when I'm out in nature. So I think that was what I was going for when I introduced these speculative elements.
Yeah, it's very cool. I love that. I love what you said about, magic being just one step, the next step from awe. That's a great way of putting it. And I love that. And, in this story, it sort of starts out being, basically contemporary realism. And then it sort of gradually works its way in. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the way that C.S. Lewis did it with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where kids in just a sort of normal post-war or during the war, actually, during the war scene in England. Then they take a train and then all of a sudden Lucy goes through this wardrobe. Anyway, it's very interesting. I think the way that you introduced that and the way that element, the speculative element, gains momentum as you go on.
And when I was building that, the introduction to this, otherworldly part of the story, there's, like I said, there's 3 point of view characters, and there's one moment in time that all 3 of them experience some element of, this, I don't want to say magic, it's this otherworldly experience. And it happens for all 3 of them at the exact same moment in very different ways. And they're all alone. They're not experiencing it together as a community. And the rest of the story is them sort of almost following that feeling towards each other. And it escalates as they get closer to each other.
Yeah, it does. It does escalate. That's very cool. So I just want to tell everybody that we're going to, in about 9 or 10 minutes, we're going to have a chance for your questions to be asked directly. So I just have a few more questions. And this Julie actually goes back to some of the work the work that we've done together on climate, on storytelling and climate. And this is one thing that sort of concerns me, and that I know that some writers think about. I mean, you do clearly have a point of view that you're trying to get across here, I think, right? And so do you ever worry about being too didactic in your fiction? And how do you sort of walk the line between getting across this point of view that you have and also just, creating the dramatic necessities?
Yeah. So I do not want to write to teach someone something. I have a point of view, but I never enter a story thinking I'm going to tell this story in order to educate people about this or to change people's minds. For me, it's always story first. It's always character and story. The elements of, ecological crisis or, climate science are the background of the story that these characters are living in, and how they're responding to these elements of climate or, ecological threat. I think that these are just the stories I want to write. I have a couple stories on the back burner. I mentioned that I just finished my 4th book. I have a 5th book that I'm like lining up to pitch soon. I have a lot of these. I always say that I think my novels are manifestations of my own climate anxieties. And lucky for me, I've got plenty of them. So I think I'm not going to run out of stories anytime soon. But I want to present a story that makes readers fall in love with my characters or care, or I love that you called it propulsive, that they want to read the story for the sake of the story. And then that maybe they're learning something about the science or the ideas or, about transcendentalism or, different ideas in my stories. But I never enter a story in order to teach something. But I do hope people think more deeply about some of these things after reading my books. And I think, fiction can be that vehicle in so many ways because, we all, we read for a story. We're wired to understand the world through the lens of story. Before we even had a written language, we would sit around campfires and share stories. And so I think that's an important way to convey information, even if it's like kind of like hiding your vegetables a little bit, I do have a lot of science in my novels, and but I want to ever feel like I'm standing on a soapbox. I'm curious how you feel about that, because I know we both write in this kind of space where we are centering nature in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the story has to come first, and that, you can't, I have heard of people talk about novels having a teaching element, but I really don't think that that's true. I think that sort of has to come incidentally. And in the case, so yeah, I feel the same way that you do. That story and like the dramatic needs of a story and the structure and everything that has to happen in order to make it come alive on the page is the most important thing. And I think that's clearly what you do here too. So, yeah.
And I think also, what we can do, and I think you do this beautifully in your writing also, is I want people to fall in love with nature. And maybe elements of nature that maybe they don't know. Like maybe they don't know the woods of Concord, Massachusetts. Maybe they don't know an old oak tree personally, or like in my book, The Last Beekeeper, in my first draft, my editor gave me notes back on the initial version she read, and her notes said something to the effect of, "Julie, you write about bees the way most people write about puppies. You need to remember, not everybody thinks bees are like cute and adorable." Right. And I took that to heart when I went back to edit it. And then my goal with that book is, in addition to the stories, is I just wanted people to love bees at the end of that book. I wasn't trying to activate an army of activists or, people to go out and protest. I mean, if they did, that's great. But I just wanted them to love bees, because I think that's where activism starts, is by loving something enough to protect it, not just the philosophy of, or, like an ideology. It's the actual love of the thing you're trying to protect is what, that activism is the next step, but you have to love it first.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And in this day and age when people are so, all of us in many ways are so screen addicted. I mean, maybe there are people who aren't, but it's something that we all struggle with. I think stories that portray humans interacting with nature in the way that you portray it, with the kind of intimacy and deep engagement and the care for nature, what I'm calling nature. I mean, I agree with you that we're all part of nature, but the interacting with other species, I think it's something that a lot of people aren't doing that in their daily lives. So that it's wonderful to read about that in a story, because maybe it has the effect of reminding, oh yeah, this is part of life too, that I can have these intimate relationships with other species that are, that don't speak the same language. But I guess my question for you is, so do you think that these kinds of stories can have some effect on shifting the paradigm or moving the needle in terms of the way that humanity, kind of the way that humanity feels in the face of the rest of nature?
I do. I actually think that very strongly. I will preface that by saying I don't think that artists, visual artists, writers, and owe anyone anything other than their art. I don't think I owe anyone like a mission statement of how to act in the world. But I do think that they can change things, and I think this is it's not a huge example, but it's a good one. When my first novel, Waiting for the Night Song, came out, and it deals with rising temperatures in New Hampshire and invasive species and the threat of forest fires in an agricultural town. And I had done a lot of science about this invasive beetle and about rising temperatures. And I had one of my earliest reviewers started out the review saying something to the effect of, I don't like politics in my fiction, and I don't pay much attention to climate science. So I was like, oh, this is going to be a great review. And she went on to say, but I really love the characters in the story. And I cared about the characters so much that I cared what happened to them, which meant by the end of the story, I now think differently about climate change. And I think that it has that capacity. It's empathy. It's all about empathy, that if you can make a good writer can make a character that people care about and empathize with. And if that character is experiencing trauma or fear or angst or grief because of climate, the reader is seeing the world through that lens. And I think it does change you in small ways. So I think it has a lot of power, actually, because the people like, I suspect you watch documentaries and read nonfiction about the, climate and nature, just like I do. But a lot of people don't want to do that, and they have other interests, but they like fiction. So they might not be watching those documentaries. But they are willing to open their minds and their hearts to story.
Yeah, oh, I agree. I think, fiction, that's the power of fiction, isn't it? This power of empathy, the power to, that the characters in the story, if they're done well, become like proxies for the reader. So it's almost like the reader is living this alternative reality. And there's nothing more powerful than that. And that's something I think that fiction can do that, film, for example, can't do, or that certainly news report can't do in the same way, that's really reach into the emotional realities of it and give people that experience.
Yeah.
So maybe one more question, and then we can open it up for audience questions. This is a sort of a process question that I was interested in as a writer and a teacher of fiction. That the book has. And this has to do with point of view. It has a multiple third person point of view for the most part. And then at the end, it comes in with a really interesting, fusion of first person. So, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Overstory, of what Powers did in the Overstory. But maybe could you talk about what led you to want to tell the story this way, from each chapter being from a different third person point of view?
Yeah, so I'm going to be kind of vague, because the point of view shift coincides with the big plot point at the end of the book. So I'm going to be a little bit vague, so I apologize. But so I do shift the point of view, I believe, 3 times in the last chapter. It goes from third person past to like a plural past, like a we voice, to a first person present, all in the same chapter. And I tried to do it seamlessly, as it like an evolution of the voice at the end. And that to me was really exciting. And part of the reason I did it is I think, this might sound a little woo-woo, but so when you see a tree, you see it in all its beauty, you can touch it, you can, feel the bark, you can smell it, you can listen to the leaves rustle, you can experience through your senses, but you cannot experience a tree. Like, you can't be a tree. You can only see it through all of you're perceiving a tree or a rock or a mountaintop. You can perceive it, but you can't experience it. And I was trying really hard to get close to nature, instead of just perceiving nature. And even my attempt at it is still a shadow away from actually, but I felt like I was trying to embody something, in my writing, because I have this idea, which is a little silly, but I love art. I have art on my wall behind me. I love art museums. So much of art is based on nature, which is just another layer of disconnection from nature. In a way, it's not the primary source, it's a replication of nature, which itself the artist could only perceive through its senses. So it's like we're constantly furthering ourselves from nature. I think of like the forest is like the ultimate art gallery. You can get to it, up close and personal. So this was my attempt to get really close, as close as I could, and I hope it worked. So it was a little bit weird.
Closer. You can't get closer.
Yeah.
than you do in this book. Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, let me see. Are there any questions out there from people? Okay, good. Here's one. Is there something in the Constitution of Concord that draws all the transcendentalists and writers? That's interesting. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not sure what it was about the place of Concord that gathered them, but I know that Emerson was a really big draw. There's a fabulous book that just came out this year called The Emerson Circle. I don't remember the author's name. It's nonfiction about all these characters from history that were all drawn. And I feel like Emerson was kind of like the godfather of the community. Bronson Alcott, Louis May Alcott's father, was part of this. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Margaret Fuller. They were all drawn, I think, to this place. I think maybe because of Emerson and because of the natural surroundings there. It was also the proximity to Boston. Emerson used to preach at the Unitarian Church in the Back Bay. So I think the proximity to New England, it was if I could go back in time and live any other time, that's when it would be. The things that were going on in Concord, the suffragist movement, the abolitionist movement. Bronson Alcott was a big advocate of women's education. He was a problematic character in other ways, but then there was Margaret Fuller, who was just way ahead of her time in the women's movement. And Frederick Douglass interacted with this community. And their emphasis on not just on, they talked a lot about religion. The Transcendentalist movement kind of grew out of the Unitarian movement. And they just formed this hub that was magnetic. And to go back and sit in on some of these meetings with these luminaries would be pretty amazing to hear Thoreau talk about Walden. Again, all these characters have some little problematic things because they're flawed humans, as we all are. But what a place that must have been. And that translates now into Concord now. It's not just history, because in Concord now, they take conservation very seriously. And there's also a history in Concord that sometimes when people die, they will their land to Concord, so that this land, Concord takes over the property so that it can't be developed. They really value their open lands or forests, which is why I said it in Concord, because in my view, if this could happen there, it could happen anywhere, because it's the least likely place to happen. I kind of wanted to put it out there that I acknowledge this is far-fetched idea that right now in Concord this would happen, but it could. And if places like an old growth forest are in danger in Concord, they're in danger everywhere.
Yeah, great point. I love that you're here's another one. Oh wait, put that back up. For both authors, what is one piece of writing about nature you think everyone should read, and why? I'll start with you, Julie.
Oh gosh, I don't even know where to start. I really love Braiding Sweetgrass. That's up close and personal. There's history, there's culture, there's so much in there. I mean, there's Walden, which is kind of a foundational piece in American literature, but I think more contemporary, I'd have to go with the Overstory, because I loved what Richard Powers did of having this huge cast of characters through, through history, and bringing them from a wide open, big, huge lens, and bring them ever closer to this effect of us feeling the intimate loss of, or the sentience of a forest. And he starts with a broad lens and brings us in close. And I thought that was really brilliant, the way he constructed that.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely say the Overstory, because it was so, and I think it did have such an effect. I mean, we've talked sort of in the abstract about, how do you, move the needle or change the paradigm or whatever. But that book really, I mean, partly because he chose to have the trees as sort of the presiding point of view in that story, which is, and he succeeded in showing us the way that time moves differently for trees, and just making us imagine trees and nature in different ways. And I agree about braiding sweetgrass. I think that nonfiction book is wonderful in terms of the way that it incorporates science and also ancient cosmology, Native American cosmology, and shows how the two are not at all contradictory. That it's the unification of two ways of seeing things, and I love that. And then in terms of there's some other nonfiction books that I've read recently that I've really loved. One of them is called Timefulness. How Thinking Like a Geologist Can Change the World. It's by Marcia Bjornerud, a geologist, and it's wonderful because it goes into this idea of geological time and puts things really in perspective. And she talks about how our sense of time, our sense of our place in time is so warped. Our meaning, humanity in the 21st century, that it's equivalent to like the way that medieval people viewed geography. So you see a medieval map and it's just got completely warped. And we just don't understand, like, I mean, the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. That doesn't even mean anything to me. And it's sort of like, it's such a long period of time. And so how do we fit in with that? And particularly how the crisis that we're dealing with now, it can help. It can help. I think it can help us it helps me feel better. It's like, okay, well, let's put things in perspective. But it also is like, okay, but we really better do something.
It makes so much sense to me that you love that book, because I see echoes of what you're talking about, of geological time in both of your most recent novels, and how humans interact with time. I can see that you read that book, and now I want to go back and read it.
It's so good. It's so good. Oh, hi, Tricia. Thank you for stepping in and saying hi. Julie, how do you stay motivated to write about environmental issues when things look so bleak?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that all my books are on dark topics. It's about rising temperatures and invasive species. It's about the loss of pollinators. It's about deforestation. But I think I write all of them from a lens of hope, from a perspective of hope, and not in a way that trivializes the real danger that is happening already. It's not even that we face in the future. It's already happening. I think those are very real things. But I think that people use hope as this giant word, and I think that sometimes people think hope means going backward, to how the world was pre-industrial revolution, or before we were using fossil fuels, or I don't think that's hope. We're not going back anywhere. We are where we are, and things are going to continue progressing. It's just reality. But I think hope can mean not giving up. It can mean hope for a single oak tree. It can mean hope for one species, one forest, one person. So I don't think hope has to be a macro hope. I think hope on a small scale matters, because what I think is important now is adapting and surviving and thriving in this changing planet, not pretending that we're going to fix it, and not pretending we're going to go back, or that all of a sudden we're going to stop carbon emissions tomorrow and we're going to cap it exactly where we are right now. That's not realistic. And so, some people might see that as bleak, but the other side of that is we're going to continue. I mean, humans aren't going to live forever, or as a species. But in our lifetime and in our children and grandchildren's lifetimes, there are going to be ways that we adapt, choices we have to make. There's going to be a lot more inequality that's going to, because of loss of land, habitat, water resources, food resources, and finding our better selves is hope. and not just hoarding resources. So I think we find hope. You can find hope in dark places, and that's the lens I write all my books through. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very similarly. I think that for the first thing I would say is that like fiction, as if you're a writer, a fiction writer, you know that like darkness is gold. Darkness is gold because that's what fuels conflict. That's and it's also part of what fiction does is it allows people to experience an alternative reality from inside the perspective of a person who's not themselves, which is one of the reasons that people crave fiction, because it's a magical thing to do. It's an antidote to loneliness because you're getting inside another mind and you're living this dark experience. But darkness also gives room for joy and hope, and I think that to me that's what gives me hope. The future, in some ways will be dark, but if you look at another really dark book, Anna Karenina, very, very dark story, but you have these moments that are just absolutely the most joyful things that have ever been written about in literature, like skating parties and hunting parties and cutting grass and just all of this. Or look at Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, also an incredibly dark story where you also have these moments, these islands of light, the elves and with light, and it's sort of like you're celebrating the good. The darkness allows you to construct a story that has the novel is a form that's capacious enough to have joy as well. And I think that is something for our future. That's what gives me hope. Is one thing is that there's, even though it's there are things we're going to have to deal with. It's going to be dark in some ways. There's also going to be plenty of moments of joy and the joy of all of the things that come with being a human. Love and good food and all of that will continue. So that's kind of what gives me hope, but also even more so, this idea that it is going to be a period of transformation. And this is where I think literature comes in, is that we can celebrate humanity and to celebrate our what I think is a destiny for this species, which is to go from being the exploiters of nature to being the stewards of nature, to understanding that our intelligence gives us a duty and a responsibility to become the people, the species that kind of in a way says, okay, this is enough. Let's figure this out so we can all have a sustainable future. Yeah. That gives me a lot of hope. I think that, and the reason that I think literature is part of that is what we've been talking about, is that stories are very powerful. So if we can show characters like the characters that are in this book with the love and the intimacy that they feel for nature, and then that becomes transmitted into the tapestry of changing paradigms. So.
I think that books like our books and other people who are writing these speculative stories are prototyping potential futures and ways for people to experience. Like you and I have both written books that in some way look to the future worlds in some way, whether near future or distant future, and imagining what they could be like. And it gives the reader an opportunity to kind of slip into the skin of these characters and live in a different version of the future. Yeah. And then when you come back to yourself, you've gained a different perspective, and you can now think, is that a future I want? And if it's not, maybe what can I do to change that? Or how do I live a little bit differently? Or if it's a utopian story with visions of things that are exciting, how do I live into that? So it's kind of where we're doing the research and development for humanity as by writing these stories in some ways.
I love that. That's a great way of putting it. I love that. Well, I think we have time for one more question, if there are any more out there. And if not, well, here we have Jenna's coming
on. Sorry, yes, I've been manning the comments behind the scenes. This is so wonderful. Actually, we did have one more question from Robin. Sorry about that. I'll try to find it. It's about the art behind your wall. Behind your wall. Robin knows that's the space.
Yeah, actually, I love that somebody asked about this, because I could not love this art anymore. It's by it's a Native American artist from New Mexico called Emmy Whitehorse. She's a living artist. She's in her 70s, and she is quite prolific. And I don't know how much you can tell, but there's these all the elements are little objects and images of nature, but it's in this like ombre of color that is it's just beautiful. I've been an admirer of her work for a really long time, and I saw her art in a hotel in New Mexico years ago, and I fell in love with her. And we actually bought this painting just a year ago, and it is maybe it's my favorite inanimate object. I just absolutely, I love her. I love her work, and it's appropriate because it's very much based on her love of nature and the natural world.
So Jenny Whitehorse or
Emmy, Emmi, Emmy Whitehorse.
Emmy, yeah, it's beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, she is really amazing. I encourage you to check out her work, but also I love that she's a living artist.
Yeah.
That's, painting from her own life experience, that is out there doing the work. So I feel a lot of love for that painting. So thank you, whoever asked that question.
Yeah. And that was from Robin in Idaho, who joins us a lot. Thank
you. Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you both so much for being here on a day when the sky outside my window is bright yellow with smoke.
Yeah.
I just really needed this conversation today because of this sort of strange and dystopian climate change happening outside my own apartment. And I thought Tim and Julie are going to give me hope, and you have, and your conversation was so inspiring. So thank you both so much for joining us. Your wonderful books and your wonderful conversation. Guys, buy at least 5 copies of each book. The GATEPOST by Tim Reed, Forest Becomes Her. I can never figure this out on StreamYard. Still can't. The right one.
Yeah, I mean, this book, just one last word, just Julie, we've been talking a little bit about doom and gloom, but this is just, it's a really fun book. It's kind of it's a kind of a wild ride. So I highly recommend reading Forest Becomes Her. And
thank you. So I appreciate that so much. And I appreciate you, Tim. I always love to talk with you, and I learn so much from you every time we talk. So it's been a pleasure. And thank you, Jenna, and A Mighty Blaze.
Okay. Thank you. Good luck. Get out in the world. Sell. Everybody buy books. We need them. We need the stories that's heard. And Julie, good luck on your tour. Tim, we'll see you out there. You've been touring all year. And everybody, thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time on The Blaze. Bye.